Hi there, my name is Chris, and I'm the mechanic on Rogue. Today, I'm going to be servicing the brakes on my 2016 Volkswagen Golf. Let's get into the job. Before I get started on it though, I want to mention that while I'm a mechanic, I'm not your mechanic. I'm making this video and its contents available for educational and informational purposes only. I do not know the specific situation of your car, and I am not guaranteeing anything in this video. Use this information at your own risk and always consult with a local mechanic before you do anything to your vehicle. Check down at the bottom of the description for my full disclaimer. Alright, now on to the job. Before I start working on the vehicle, I like to get my workstation and vehicle set up properly first. The wheel needs to be jacked up and the wheel removed in order to access the brake pads, rotors, and calipers. I have already made a separate video talking about the process to remove a wheel, so check it out if you haven't already. The link is down in the description. Different vehicles take different tools, so the requirements vary massively based on the vehicle that's being serviced. In my case, I need a couple 3/8 sockets, a 3/8 ratchet, a pair of needle nose vice grips, a large flathead screwdriver, some brake lubricant, some brake parts cleaner, some blue thread locker, and some 80 grit sandpaper. My first step is to remove the caliper, and to do that I want to remove the caliper bolts. On my vehicle, these caliper bolts thread directly into the ends of the slider pins. These slider pins spin freely. They have a nasty habit of spinning when I'm trying to remove the bolts, so I use a pair of vice grips to hold them in place while I pull the bolt out. I'm going to grab my 3/8 ratchet and an appropriate size socket, and I'm going to pull both of those out. With both bolts removed, I'm ready to remove the caliper. Sometimes it's stuck on there a bit, so I like to use a flathead screwdriver to pry the ends of it to get it off. With the caliper removed, I can simply pull the pads out with my hands. We're going to set those aside for later, as those are one of the components that we need to clean. With the pads removed, I'm ready to take off the bracket. In order to do that, I'm going to take my 3/8 ratchet and the appropriate size socket. I'm going to pull both the bolts that hold the caliper bracket onto the steering knuckle. With the bracket removed, I'm now ready to begin my inspection and cleaning. First, I want to look at my rotor. I want to look at the area where the pads wear into. This is called the contact surface. I'm looking to make sure that the contact surface has no unusual rust patterns on it. It should be clearing, almost a mirror-like finish. I also want to check for grooving and bluing. Grooving occurs when debris gets embedded in the brake pad material and causes a groove to be worn into the contact surface of the rotor, and bluing occurs when excessive heat is added to the rotor. On my vehicle, there's only a little bit of rust on the outside of the contact surface. That's okay and normal because there's nothing actually contacting that area of the rotor. If I did find any issues with my rotor, I would go ahead and start replacing the brake pads and rotors rather than servicing them. With my rotors okay, I'm now ready to start looking at my pads. I want to firstly evaluate the thickness of the friction material. I am usually looking for thickness of over 3 millimeters. Anything under that, I would consider that to be too low to service. I also want to look over the pad and make sure there's no excessive cracking or heat damage or foreign material embedded in the friction material of the pad, as well as to inspect the backing for excessive rusting at these contact points here, here, and here. Any excessive rusting here could indicate that the pad was seized or starting to seize. If the brake pad is getting too low or it's damaged in any other way, again, I would move to replacing the brake pads and rotors rather than servicing them. Finally, I want to look at my brake bracket. I'll check for rust in the area where the brake pad rests, as well as I'll remove the sliders which are on both ends of the brake bracket. With the sliders removed, I want to check to make sure that they're moving in and out freely in the bracket, as well as that there's no rust or corrosion on the actual pin itself. In my situation, my brake rotor, my brake pads, my sliders, and my brake bracket are okay. I can move to cleaning them next. I'm going to want to clean the rust off of the brake pads and the brake bracket, and I'm going to want to apply new lubricant to the back of the brake pads as well as to the slider pins. If there was excessive rust on the brake pad backing plate, I'd want to clean that up. In my situation though, I don't really have anything excessive, and so I'm not really worried about it. In my case, all I want to do is to disrupt the wear pattern on the face of my brake pad. To do this, I'm going to use my 80 grit sandpaper. This will create brake dust, which is hazardous to your health. So I want to do this in a well-ventilated area wearing an appropriate mask. Using the 80 grit sandpaper, I want to go over the face of the pad until new material is exposed. And I'm going to keep on going until the entire face of the pad looks like that. If there was a line in the middle of the brake pad, like this one here, I would also make sure that line is clear. That also helps to dissipate the brake dust from the face of the pad during braking. Next, I'm going to clean the brake bracket. All I really want to do is to remove the rust which is building up where the brake pad contacts the brake bracket. Removing the rust buildup there helps prevent rust jacking of the pad. When rust jacking occurs, that seizes the pad in its particular position in the bracket. With the rust removed, it helps the brake pad move freely in the brake bracket as you're braking. If the rust were really bad, a file or a die grinder might be necessary to remove that. Once I remove most of the rust with the sandpaper, I used a little bit of brake clean and a rag to get rid of all the other debris that was there. Once finished, you should be able to see shiny metal like so. Now I'm going to do this to the remaining contact points. And finally, when all of the old rust has been cleaned to the contact points and also to the slider pins. Alright, now we got everything all cleaned up and are ready to put it all back together. Before I do that, I'm going to look at the threads on the bolts that I removed. I'm looking for remains of thread locker. That can help indicate if I need to use thread locker when I reinstall it. Usually, thread locker is red or blue, but they do also have other colors available as well. You always want to make sure that you use the same color that you took off because they're color coded based on their strength. For this car, nothing is used on the bracket bolts and blue thread locker is used on the caliper bolts. I'm going to install my brake bracket first. If you are unsure about how tight these fasteners should be, get a torque spec from a repair manual or another reliable source before you start the job. Once my bracket is installed, I'm going to install my brake pads, and I want to apply a thin layer of brake lubricant on the backing of the pad. This is going to help with reducing brake squeals and brake noise. With the lubrication applied, I'm ready to put the caliper back on. As a side note, I want to make sure that I do not twist the flexible rubber brake line that goes to the caliper. If I look closely at the brake line of the caliper, on most brake lines, there's lines running the length of the brake line. I want to make sure that these lines are running straight and true and that they're not showing that it's twisted. If I twist the line in the future, that line could not be long enough or it doesn't have enough elasticity to stretch when you're turning your wheels all the way, and you could blow the brake line. If these lines are straight, I know I'm good. And remember what I said about thread locker. These caliper bolts need some. So before I put my caliper on, I'm going to clean the old thread locker off and apply a dab of new thread locker. Then I'm going to put my caliper on, make sure the brake line is lined up, and thread those caliper bolts in nice and tight. And with my caliper on, I'm done. I just got to get my wheel back on and I'm ready to move on to the next one. When I'm finished servicing all four of the brakes, there is a final step that I do, and that is to pump the brake pedal. Sometimes your caliper piston, which is hydraulically connected to your brake pedal, is pushed back a little bit during the service. When you put your foot on the brake pedal, it pushes that piston out. If your piston is not where it needs to be, touching the pads, you're actually going to notice your brake pedal fades, and this is going to cause your brakes not to work until you pump it a couple times and that piston gets the proper clearance where it needs to be. This is definitely a very important step. I've seen guys who just finished working on a customer's vehicle back their car right out of the shop and right into a wall because they forgot to do this step. Don't be that guy. And that's a brake service, guys. I hope you liked this video or learned something new today. If you did like this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. If you really want to, just follow the link in the description and you can buy me a coffee. That's all I got for now. Until next time, peace!